The Boeing 767 was 37,000 feet above the Pacific when the radio crackled to life with words that would change everything. Delta 477, this is NORAD control. We need immediate identification of the female major currently aboard your aircraft. Please respond. Captain Mitchell's hand froze on the yoke. In 23 years of commercial aviation, he'd never heard a request like that. The cabin was dark, passengers lost in the artificial twilight of red-eye sleep. Somewhere in row 7B, Major Valentina Ghost Kozlova was curled against the window, her service dress blues folded neatly in the overhead compartment, dog tags tucked beneath a worn Stanford sweatshirt. She'd been dreaming of Kandahar again. The weight of the F-16 stick in her hands, the burn of afterburner fuel in her throat, the way her wingman's voice had cut through the static. Ghost, you've got 2 bogeys, 11 o'clock high. But the dream was fading now, replaced by the insistent buzz of the intercom and a flight attendant's gentle shake of her shoulder. "Ma'am, the captain needs to speak with you." Ghost's eyes opened, not the slow blink of civilian waking, but the instant alertness of a combat pilot. She'd learned that skill over the skis of Afghanistan, where sleeping meant dying and dying meant letting your squadron down. The flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes and nervous hands, stepped back as Ghost sat up. "What's the situation?" Ghost's voice carried the edge it always did when pulled from sleep. Around her, passengers stirred but didn't wake. A businessman in 7A muttered something about turbulence. A college student across the aisle adjusted her earphones. "The captain," he didn't say, just that NORAD was asking questions. NORAD. Ghost's blood chilled. The North American Aerospace Defense Command didn't make casual inquiries about off-duty military personnel on commercial flights. She'd been flying military aircraft for 12 years before transitioning to civilian contractors, but her security clearance remained active. Ultra-classified projects had a way of following you, even 30,000 feet above the ocean. She followed the attendant forward, past sleeping families and snoring executives, toward the cockpit door. Captain Mitchell was waiting, his weathered face tight with concern. Behind him, the co-pilot was adjusting radio frequencies with practiced precision. "Major Kozlova," Mitchell's voice dropped to a whisper, "I've got some very serious people on the radio asking about you. They want to know your current status, destination, and—" He paused, studying her face. "They want to know if you're traveling under duress." Ghost felt the familiar weight of invisible eyes watching her. After years in special operations, she recognized the signs. Someone, somewhere, believed she was either a threat or a target. The question was which. The radio crackled again, cutting through the aircraft's gentle hum. "Delta 477, this is General Harrison, NORAD Command. I need to speak with Ghost immediately. We have a Code Silver situation developing, and she's the only pilot within range who has clearance for what's coming." Ghost moved toward the radio with the fluid precision that had earned her the call sign. In the darkness behind her, 300 passengers slept peacefully, unaware that their quiet flight had just become the opening move in a crisis that would test everything she'd learned in the crucible of combat. The commercial airliner hummed steadily westward, but Ghost was already transitioning back to war. She keyed the radio with steady fingers, her voice cutting through static and distance. "General Harrison, this is Major Kozlova. Ghost is awake, sir." 12 miles below, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. Above, stars wheeled in ancient patterns while satellites tracked every movement across the globe. And somewhere in the electromagnetic spectrum that surrounded them all, an alarm was sounding in bunkers deep beneath Colorado mountains. General Harrison's voice came through clear and urgent. "Ghost, we have multiple unknown aircraft approaching the west coast. Radar signature suggests stealth technology, but not ours. They appeared 18 minutes ago, altitude varying between Angels 20 and 45. Current vector puts them on intercept course with several major metropolitan areas. Ghost's hand tightened on the radio handset. She could feel Captain Mitchell and his co-pilot watching her, their civilian minds struggling to process the transformation they were witnessing. The tired passenger in the Stanford sweatshirt was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. "How many bogies, sir?" 12 confirmed. Possibly more. "Ghost, I'm going to be direct with you. We've got 3 operational squadrons grounded due to maintenance issues, 2 more dealing with weather delays at Peterson. You're currently aboard the westernmost aircraft with an available pilot who has ultra clearance for the defensive systems we need to activate." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "Sir, you're talking about civilian airspace, populated areas." "I'm talking about potential first strike capability, Major. These aren't crop dusters." Captain Mitchell leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Ma'am, if you need us to divert." Ghost shook her head, her mind already calculating distances, fuel loads, response times. "General, what assets do we have available for intercept?" "That's the problem, Ghost. The nearest operational fighters are 90 minutes out from potential contact zones, but we do have something else. Something you helped test 18 months ago at Groom Lake." Her breath caught. The Aurora project. Hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft with capabilities that officially didn't exist. She'd run 17 test flights in the prototype, pushing experimental engines through flight profiles that had redefined what aircraft could do. The project was so classified that even thinking about it in civilian airspace felt like treason. "Sir, the Aurora birds aren't combat-rated. They're reconnaissance platforms." "Not anymore. We've made modifications since your test flights. The question is, are you willing to get back in the cockpit?" Through the cockpit windows, Ghost could see the first hint of dawn touching the eastern horizon. Below them, the lights of coastal cities began to twinkle in the pre-morning darkness. Millions of people starting their days, unaware that unknown aircraft were approaching with unknown intentions. She thought about her discharge papers, filed just 6 months ago. Her decision to leave active duty after 12 years of combat flying. The quiet civilian life she'd been trying to build, teaching aerodynamics at a small college in Oregon, dating a literature professor who wrote poetry about her eyes. All of that felt like it belonged to someone else now. The radio crackled with increasing urgency. Other voices were joining the conversation, air traffic controllers reporting anomalous contacts, Navy ships tracking surface radar blooms, missile defense coordinators running through engagement protocols. The crisis was escalating with mechanical precision, and Ghost found herself at the center of it. "General Harrison," she said finally, her voice carrying the tone that had once commanded fighter squadrons over hostile territory. "Where do you need me?" "Edwards Air Force Base. We're vectoring you there for immediate transfer to Aurora 7. The aircraft is fueled and ready, but Ghost, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't a training exercise. If these unknown contacts prove hostile, you'll be our first line of response over civilian populations." Captain Mitchell was staring at her now with something approaching awe. His co-pilot had stopped pretending not to listen. Behind them, a flight attendant waited nervously, unsure whether to offer coffee or retreat to the cabin. Ghost closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of duty settling on her shoulders like an old coat. When she opened them again, her decision was already made. "Request immediate vector to Edwards, General. And sir, you might want to wake up whoever's in charge of explaining this to the media, because in about 6 hours, a lot of people are going to have questions about why there are military aircraft over Lowe's Angels." The transformation was complete now. The sleeping passenger from 7B was gone, replaced by the pilot who had once single-handedly held off 12 enemy fighters while her wingman limped home with a damaged engine. Ghost was back in the war, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. Through the radio static came the sound of controlled chaos, generals conferring, technicians running diagnostics, pilots being scrambled from bases across 3 states. But underneath it all was something else, the quiet confidence of a military machine that had found its weapon. They had Ghost, and for the first time since the crisis began, that felt like enough. Captain Mitchell was already adjusting their heading, the massive airliner banking smoothly toward the California coast. Behind them, passengers began to stir as the aircraft's movement shifted their bodies in sleep. A child whimpered softly. An elderly man coughed and reached for water. None of them knew they were flying toward the opening act of something that would either be remembered as humanity's finest hour or its last. Ghost keyed the radio one final time before heading back to her seat to gather her gear. "NORAD control, this is Ghost. I'm coming home." The Pacific Ocean passed beneath them in the pre-dawn darkness, its surface hiding depths that no light could penetrate. Above, the stars began to fade as the eastern sky brightened with the promise of what might be the most important day in human history. And in Seat 7B, Major Valentina Kozlova was already transforming back into the pilot who had never lost a fight. The Boeing 767 descended through morning air that tasted of salt and possibility. Edwards Air Force Base sprawled across the Mojave Desert below them, its runways cutting precise lines through sand and sage. Ghost pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar patterns of military aviation: fuel trucks, maintenance crews, aircraft positioned with geometric precision. But there were differences too, more security than usual. Communications arrays that hadn't been there during her test flights 18 months ago. And on the far side of the base, behind barriers that seemed to shimmer in the heat, a hangar she recognized but had hoped never to see again. The Aurora Project facility, where she'd pushed experimental aircraft through flight profiles that had redefined the boundaries of atmospheric flight, where she'd learned that the sky wasn't really the limit, just the beginning. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the intercom, carefully neutral for the benefit of sleepy passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Los Angeles International. However, due to air traffic control requirements, we'll be making a brief technical stop at a military facility. We apologize for any inconvenience." Ghost almost smiled at the understatement. 300 civilians were about to get an unscheduled look at one of the most classified installations in the United States, and Mitchell was treating it like a weather delay. The landing was smooth, professional, exactly what she'd expect from a veteran commercial pilot adapting to military precision. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, Ghost could see vehicles approaching. Black SUVs, military police, and something that made her breath catch: a full colonel in flight suit walking directly toward their aircraft. Colonel Sarah Chen, her former squadron commander, the woman who taught her that being underestimated was just another tactical advantage. They'd flown together over Afghanistan, developed tactics that had saved dozens of lives and earned them both distinguished service medals. But Chen had always been destined for stars and administrative duties, while Ghost had remained in the cockpit, chasing the edge of what aircraft could do. The aircraft door opened with the mechanical precision of civilian aviation, but the woman who stepped aboard moved with military authority. Chen's eyes found Ghost immediately, cutting through 300 passengers to lock onto the pilot she'd once trusted with impossible missions. "Major Kozlova, thank you for responding." The formality felt strange after years of shared danger and late-night debriefings. But Ghost understood the subtext. They weren't alone, and classified conversations required careful language. "Colonel Chen, I assume the situation has developed." "Significantly. We need to debrief you immediately." Chen's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the curious passengers, the flight crew, the impossibility of conducting classified business in civilian airspace. "We have a private facility prepared." Ghost nodded and stood, gathering the small bag that contained everything she'd brought for what was supposed to be a quiet vacation. Around her, passengers were beginning to ask questions. Where were they? Why military vehicles? Was there some kind of emergency? She followed Chen down the aircraft stairs and across hot tarmac, leaving behind the comfortable anonymity of civilian travel. With each step, she felt herself transitioning back to the world she'd left 6 months ago. A world where decisions were measured in lives saved or lost, where the margin for error was zero, and where the sky itself could become a battlefield. The hangar they entered was exactly as she remembered, cavernous, climate-controlled, filled with the distinctive smell of aviation fuel and possibility. But the aircraft waiting inside was different from the prototype she'd flown 18 months ago. Sleeker, more aggressive, bristling with systems that definitely hadn't been there during her test flights. Aurora 7 looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that the future of aerial combat would be fought at speeds that made traditional fighter aircraft look like they were standing still. Jesus, Ghost breathed, her professional composure slipping for just a moment. What did you do to her? Chen's smile was grim. We made her into what she was always meant to be, a weapon. As they approached the aircraft, Ghost could see the modifications. Hardpoints for ordnance that didn't officially exist, sensor arrays that could track targets across multiple spectrums, and engines that promised performance levels that would have been science fiction just 5 years ago. But it was still fundamentally the same aircraft she'd learned to love during those classified test flights. The same responsiveness, the same willingness to push beyond conventional limits. The same sense that this machine had been built not just to fly, but to dance with the edge of space itself. Briefing starts in 10 minutes, Chen said, leading her toward a conference room that looked like it had been assembled from spare NASA parts and military efficiency. But Ghost, I need you to understand something before we begin. They stopped walking. Around them, technicians and ground crew moved with the purposeful efficiency of people preparing for something momentous. Through the hangar's open doors, Ghost could see the civilian airliner still parked on the tarmac, its passengers probably wondering if they'd accidentally stumbled into a Tom Clancy novel. What is it, Sarah? The unknown contacts. They're not just approaching the West Coast anymore. They're here. 12 aircraft flying in formation, maintaining radio silence. And Ghost. Chen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They're flying in patterns you developed, tactics from your classified test flights. Someone out there knows exactly what Aurora 7 can do, and they're using that knowledge against us. The implications hit Ghost like a physical blow. Her test flights had been beyond classified, ultra-black projects that existed only in the memories of perhaps 20 people worldwide. If someone had access to that information, it meant either a security breach of unprecedented magnitude or something far worse. How is that possible? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to get you in the air. Because whoever they are, they're heading for Lowe's Angels, and you're the only pilot qualified to intercept them in something fast enough to matter. Ghost looked back at Aurora 7, her mind already calculating flight profiles and engagement parameters. Somewhere over the Pacific, unknown aircraft were approaching with hostile intent and impossible knowledge. Below them, millions of civilians were starting their morning routines, unaware that their lives might depend on the decisions she made in the next few hours. She'd left the military to escape this kind of responsibility, but responsibility, it seemed, had followed her home. "All right," she said finally, "let's go save the world." The briefing room buzzed with the controlled energy of a military crisis in full swing. Wall-mounted displays showed radar tracks, threat assessments, and real-time intelligence feeds from satellites Ghost didn't officially know existed. At the center of it all stood General Harrison, a man she'd never met but whose reputation preceded him like thunder. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of presence that came from making life-and-death decisions without flinching. His eyes found her immediately as she entered, and she felt the weight of assessment, not the casual evaluation of a superior officer, but the focused examination of someone calculating whether she was the right tool for an impossible job. "Major Kozlova, your reputation precedes you." "Sir," she remained at attention, waiting for permission to relax that didn't come. "Tell me about the Aurora 7 test flights, specifically the high-altitude intercept protocols you developed." The question was direct, professional, but Ghost caught the undertone. He wasn't asking about technical specifications. He was asking about something more personal, something that connected her classified work to the current crisis in ways that made her skin crawl with apprehension. "Sir, those protocols were developed for theoretical scenarios, intercept profiles against aircraft operating at extreme altitudes and velocities. We were testing the Aurora's capabilities against projected future threats." "Projected, future." Harrison repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "Major, the aircraft currently approaching Los Angeles are using your intercept protocols. In reverse, they're flying defensive patterns based on tactics you developed to defeat them." The room fell silent except for the ambient hum of electronic equipment. Ghost felt the eyes of everyone present, technicians, intelligence analysts, Chen herself, waiting for her response. But her mind was racing through implications that seemed to spiral into impossibility. "Sir, that's not possible. Those protocols are classified at levels that what, Major? That prevent foreign intelligence services from accessing them, that ensure only American personnel ever see them." Harrison's voice carried the edge of someone who'd been asking these questions for hours without satisfactory answers. "Let me share some intelligence with you." The main display flickered, showing a satellite image of 12 aircraft in perfect formation. They looked wrong somehow, too smooth, too integrated, like they'd been designed by people who understood aerodynamics at a level that pushed beyond current technology. "These aircraft appeared on our tracking systems 18 hours ago. No radar signature before that. They simply materialized in our airspace like they'd been there all along. They're maintaining formation patterns that match, exactly, the defensive protocols from your Aurora test flights." Ghost stared at the display, her pilot's eye automatically analyzing formation spacing, flight angles, tactical positioning. It was her work, reflected back like a mirror image. Every calculation she'd made, every scenario she'd tested, inverted and deployed against the very systems she'd helped develop. "Someone," Harrison continued, "has not only accessed your classified protocols, but has built aircraft specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses you identified in our defensive systems. The question is, how?" The briefing room's air conditioning hummed softly, but Ghost felt sweat beginning to form along her spine. There were only a handful of possible explanations, and none of them were good. Either there was a security breach of unprecedented magnitude, or someone with access to her most classified work had gone rogue, or— "Sir," she said carefully, "there is another possibility." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The Aurora project wasn't just about building faster aircraft. It was about pushing the boundaries of what's possible in atmospheric flight. Some of the test scenarios we ran, they weren't just theoretical. They were preparing for contact with aircraft that might operate beyond current technological paradigms. She could feel the tension in the room shifting, becoming something more focused and dangerous. Chen was watching her with an expression that mixed professional interest with personal concern. "Are you suggesting," Harrison said slowly, "that these aircraft might not be of terrestrial origin?" Ghost looked back at the display, studying the formation patterns that mirrored her own work with unsettling precision. "Sir, I'm suggesting that the defensive protocols I developed were designed to counter threats that our intelligence community believed might someday emerge from beyond our current technological understanding. If someone has built aircraft that can defeat those protocols, they either have access to technology that officially doesn't exist, or they have access to technology that officially doesn't exist here. The silence that followed was profound. In the space of a single briefing, they'd moved from discussing foreign adversaries to contemplating possibilities that most military personnel spent their careers dismissing as science fiction. Harrison walked to the display, studying the formation of aircraft that continued their steady approach toward the most populated region of the United States. Major Kozlova, regardless of their origin, these aircraft represent a clear and present threat to civilian populations. Your job hasn't changed. Can you intercept them? Ghost felt the familiar weight of combat responsibility settling on her shoulders. The questions about origins and impossible technology could wait. Right now, 12 unknown aircraft were approaching Lowe's Angels, and she was the only pilot available with both the clearance and the experience to engage them. Yes, sir, but I need to understand the rules of engagement. Are we talking about interception and identification, or are we authorized for defensive action? That depends on their intentions. But Major, Harrison turned from the display to face her directly. If they prove hostile over civilian populations, you are authorized to use any means necessary to neutralize the threat. The weight of those words settled over the briefing room like a shroud. In military parlance, any means necessary was as close to unlimited authority as the chain of command ever provided. It meant she had permission to make decisions that could start wars or save civilizations, depending on how the next few hours unfolded. Ghost nodded once crisply. Understood, sir. Colonel Chen will handle your pre-flight briefing. The Aurora 7 is fully fueled and equipped with systems that weren't available during your test flights. Some of them are still technically experimental, but our engineers assure me they're operational. What kind of systems? Chen stepped forward, her expression carrying the weight of classified knowledge. Directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse generators, and something new, a quantum radar system that can track targets operating in stealth mode at ranges that exceed anything we've previously achieved. Ghost felt her eyebrows rise despite her professional composure. Quantum radar, that's still theoretical. Not anymore. We've had a breakthrough in the last 6 months. The system can detect quantum signatures at distances that make conventional stealth technology obsolete. If these unknown aircraft are using advanced stealth capabilities, Aurora 7 will be able to track them regardless. The implications were staggering. If the United States had achieved operational quantum radar, it represented a technological leap that would redefine the future of aerial combat. But it also meant they were about to test experimental weapons systems in live combat over civilian populations, a scenario that violated every military protocol Ghost had ever learned. Ma'am, she said carefully, are we really talking about using experimental weapons over Lowe's Angels? Chen's expression was grim. We're talking about using whatever works, Major. Because if we can't stop these aircraft, the experimental weapons will be the least of our concerns. Through the hangar's reinforced windows, Ghost could see Aurora 7 being wheeled into position for pre-flight procedures. Ground crews moved with the urgent efficiency of people preparing for combat, their movements choreographed by years of training for scenarios they'd hoped never to face. In 12 hours, she'd gone from sleeping peacefully on a commercial flight to standing in a classified hangar, preparing to pilot experimental aircraft against unknown threats using weapons that officially didn't exist. The transition felt surreal, but the weight of responsibility was all too familiar. How long do I have? Harrison checked his watch. The unknown contacts will reach the outer edge of Lowe's Angels airspace in 90 minutes. You need to be airborne in 30. 30 minutes to prepare for a mission that could determine whether millions of civilians lived or died. 30 minutes to transition from civilian passenger to combat pilot flying against enemies who might possess technology beyond human understanding. Ghost looked around the briefing room one final time, memorizing faces and taking mental inventory of the support structure that would be coordinating her mission from the ground. These people, technicians, intelligence analysts, communications specialists, would be her lifeline once she was alone in the sky at altitudes where the atmosphere itself became an enemy. "All right," she said, her voice carrying the tone that had once commanded fighter squadrons over hostile territory. "Let's go meet our visitors." The pre-flight preparations moved with military precision, each step executed by technicians who understood that mechanical failure wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially catastrophic. Ghost walked around Aurora 7's sleek fuselage, conducting the visual inspection that every pilot performed regardless of how many ground crews had already certified the aircraft's readiness. The aircraft was beautiful in the way that only purpose-built machines could be beautiful. Every line, every surface, every component had been designed for a single goal: to fly faster and higher than anything else in Earth skis. The modifications since her test flights 18 months ago were immediately apparent: weapon mounts that didn't exist in the original design, sensor arrays that bristled with purpose, and engine intakes that suggested power levels beyond anything she'd previously experienced. "She's been upgraded," Chen said, joining her beside the aircraft's port wing. "New engines, new avionics, new weapon systems, but the flight characteristics you remember should be largely unchanged." "How much faster?" "Mach 6.7 in level flight, Mach 8.2 in a dive profile." Chen's voice carried the satisfaction of an engineer discussing a favorite project. "At maximum velocity, you'll be covering ground faster than most ballistic missiles." Ghost whistled softly. During her test flights, Aurora 7 had topped out at Mach 5.1, fast enough to outrun any known interceptor aircraft, but the new performance figures put her in a different category entirely. She would be flying at speeds that approached the boundary between atmospheric flight and orbital mechanics. What about the weapon systems? 3 primary packages. First, conventional air-to-air missiles with seekers that can lock onto quantum signatures. Second, directed energy weapons that operate across multiple spectrums, essentially military-grade lasers with enough power to disable electronics or, if necessary, destroy structural components. Third, and this is still experimental, electromagnetic pulse generators that can disrupt electronics across a wide area without kinetic damage. The implications were staggering. Aurora 7 wasn't just a reconnaissance aircraft anymore. It was a weapons platform that could engage targets using energy systems that existed only in classified laboratories. The fact that they were trusting her with such technology spoke to either absolute confidence in her abilities or absolute desperation about the threat they were facing. "Chen," she said quietly, "what aren't you telling me?" Her former squadron commander looked around the hangar, ensuring they weren't overheard by the ground crews preparing the aircraft for flight. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of classified knowledge that had been keeping her awake at night. "The unknown aircraft. They're not just using your intercept protocols, they're improving on them. Our satellites have been tracking their approach for 18 hours, and their formation patterns have been evolving in real time. They're learning, adapting, responding to our defensive posture as if they have access to our current tactical thinking." Ghost felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hangar's air conditioning. That suggests either real-time intelligence access or cognitive capabilities that exceed human norm. "Yes." Chen's expression was grim. "We're not just dealing with advanced technology, Ghost. We're dealing with advanced intelligence. And that intelligence knows exactly how we think, how we fight, and how we defend ourselves." The ground crew chief approached with the distinctive pace of someone delivering pre-flight briefings on schedule regardless of broader strategic concerns. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez had been preparing aircraft for combat missions for 23 years, and his weathered face suggested he'd seen every possible variation of military crisis. Major Kozlova, aircraft is ready for flight. All systems green, fuel at 100%, weapons armed and tested. You're cleared for engine start whenever you're ready. Ghost nodded and began the ritual of suiting up: flight suit, helmet, survival gear, weapons systems controls. Each piece of equipment had been designed for the unique environment of hypersonic flight, where traditional aircraft limitations gave way to something approaching spaceflight. The helmet was particularly impressive, incorporating heads-up display technology that would project tactical information directly onto her visor, quantum radar feeds that would show target positions with unprecedented accuracy, and communication systems that could maintain contact with ground control, even at altitudes where conventional radio became unreliable. "Ghost," Chen said as she finished the equipment check, "I need you to understand something. This mission isn't just about intercepting unknown aircraft. It's about determining whether humanity is ready for whatever comes next." The words carried weight that went beyond military strategy or tactical considerations. They were talking about first contact, about the possibility that Earth's technological isolation was ending whether humanity was prepared or not. "What do you want me to do if they try to communicate?" "Listen, record everything, but remember your primary mission is to protect civilian populations. If communication isn't possible, if they prove hostile." Chen's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Ghost climbed the ladder to Aurora 7's cockpit, settling into the pilot's seat that had been custom-fitted to her body dimensions during the original test flights. The aircraft's systems came online with the smooth precision of advanced engineering, displays flickering to life, engines beginning their pre-flight warm-up sequence. Around her, the hangar buzzed with activity as final preparations were completed. Ground crews cleared the area, communications specialists established contact protocols, and somewhere in classified facilities across the country, other people were making decisions about how humanity would respond to whatever was approaching from the Pacific. But in the end, it would come down to her, alone in the cockpit of an experimental aircraft, flying at impossible speeds toward a confrontation that would either be remembered as humanity's finest hour or its last. Ghost ran through the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, each item confirmed and verified. External power disconnected, engines spooling to operational temperature, flight control surfaces tested and responsive, weapons systems armed and ready. "Edwards Tower, this is Aurora 7. Request clearance for immediate takeoff." "Aurora 7, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 09er. Winds light and variable, ceiling and visibility unlimited. Good hunting." Good hunting, the traditional farewell for combat pilots heading into unknown danger. Ghost smiled grimly as she advanced the throttles and felt Aurora 7 begin to roll forward, gathering speed with the inexorable momentum of advanced physics applied to military necessity. The aircraft lifted off with the smooth grace of machines designed to operate beyond conventional limitations. Below her, the Mojave Desert fell away, becoming an abstract pattern of brown and tan that quickly gave way to the blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Somewhere ahead, 12 unknown aircraft were approaching Los Angeles with hostile intent and impossible knowledge. Behind her, millions of civilians were going about their morning routines, unaware that their lives might depend on the decisions she made in the next hour. Ghost banked Aurora 7 toward the west and began climbing toward the operational altitude where the real work would begin. At 30,000 feet, she was still in the realm of conventional aviation. At 60,000 feet, She would be operating in the thin air where only specialized aircraft could function. At 90,000 feet, where she expected to find her targets, she would be flying at the edge of space itself, where the sky became black and the horizon curved away toward infinity. The first radar contact appeared on her display when she was 70 miles from the coast, climbing through 58,000 feet at Mach 4.6. The quantum radar system that Chen had described proved itself immediately. 12 distinct signatures appeared with crystalline clarity, their positions, velocities, and heading information displayed with precision that made conventional radar look primitive. They were exactly where the intelligence estimates had predicted, flying in formation at 85,000 feet, maintaining steady course and speed toward Los Angeles. But something about their radar signatures was wrong. They appeared too clean, too perfect, as if they were designed by people who understood stealth technology better than the engineers who had invented it. Edwards Control, this is Aurora 7. I have 12 contacts bearing 270, range 68 miles, altitude Angels 85. Contacts are maintaining formation and course toward Los Angeles metro area. Copy, Aurora 7. You are cleared to close for visual identification. Rules of engagement remain. Identify, intercept, communicate if possible. Use force only if contacts prove hostile. Ghost acknowledged and adjusted her course, Aurora 7's engines pushing her through the thin air at speeds that transformed geography into abstraction. The California coast passed beneath her in moments, the sprawling urban area of Los Angeles visible as a gray smudge against the brown landscape. At this altitude, the sky was deep blue shading toward black, and she could see the curve of the Earth's surface stretching away toward horizons that seemed impossibly distant. It was a view that only a handful of humans had ever experienced, and under different circumstances, she might have taken time to appreciate the privilege. But her attention was focused on the 12 contacts that were now 40 miles ahead and closing. Aurora 7's quantum radar was providing detail that conventional sensors could never achieve, not just position and velocity, but structural information that suggested these aircraft were unlike anything in current military inventories. They were too smooth, too integrated, as if they had been grown rather than built. Their surfaces showed no visible seams, no obvious engine intakes, no conventional control surfaces. They moved through the thin air with an efficiency that suggested propulsion systems operating on principles that she didn't recognize. Edwards Control, Aurora 7. I have visual contact with unknown aircraft. They are unusual, requesting permission to close for detailed identification. Aurora 7. You are cleared to approach. Maintain defensive posture but attempt communication on all standard frequencies. Ghost began broadcasting on emergency channels, using both English and the standard international aviation codes that any Earth-based aircraft should recognize. Her transmissions echoed through the thin atmosphere, carrying across frequencies that spanned military, civilian, and emergency service bands. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force Aurora 7. You are approaching restricted airspace. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came not as radio transmission, but as something far more unsettling. The 12 unknown aircraft broke formation with perfect synchronization, shifting into a new configuration that Ghost recognized with dawning horror. They were deploying her own intercept protocols, the defensive patterns she developed during classified test flights, designed to counter exactly the kind of high-speed approach she was currently making. They had turned her own tactics against her with precision that suggested not just access to classified information, but perfect understanding of how she thought and how she fought. Edwards Control, she said, her voice steady despite the implications of what she was seeing. The unknown aircraft are deploying defensive patterns based on classified Aurora Project protocols. They know exactly what this aircraft can do, and they're prepared for everything we've got. Aurora 7, maintain approach. We need identification before we can determine hostile intent. But as Ghost closed to within 10 miles of the unknown aircraft, she realized that identification might not be possible. These machines looked like they had been designed by minds that understood physics at a level that pushed beyond human engineering. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested capabilities far beyond anything she'd encountered in 12 years of military aviation. And they were heading directly for Los Angeles, where 8 million people were starting their morning routines completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Aurora 7 streaked through the thin air at 87,000 feet, her pilot's eyes locked onto the formation of aircraft that shouldn't exist. At this altitude, the sky was black above and deep blue below, the curvature of the Earth visible as a reminder of just how high they were flying and how far they could fall. The unknown aircraft had settled into their new formation with mechanical precision, creating a defensive